Hi everyone, I'm Harv, Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Welcome back everybody, and it is 2022, and I'm sitting down today with Peter Roband. Good afternoon, Peter.
Hi, Harv.
And we were just talking beforehand. We thought we'd better switch on the button because our conversation had started, as it is wont to do when you and I sit down, Peter. But and saying this has been we welcoming this podcast, and it's lovely to have the time with you. I've come up today to Tea Point in Matakana, in your stunning place up here, overlooking the sea. We've been for a swim in the rock pools. I was going to say this morning, early afternoon, just stunning spot. So thank you for inviting me up here as well, Peter.
Pleasure.
And it's just, you and Lindsay bought this not quite 12 months ago.
We bought it 13 months ago, but we got it 10 and a half months
right.
ago.
Yeah. Fabulous timing. And it is just, lovely to be here. Peter, before we kick off, I'm going to kick off not introducing you, but the person that introduced you to Collective Intelligence, which is Eva, and an amazing woman. And I think you knew her a whole lot better than I did, that you'd done a lot of work with her and so forth.
3 years.
3 years. So it's not that you're not important, Peter, but let's just start off with Eva. Tell me...
What a great start.
Tell me about Eva.
Cool. So I met Eva. Eva was in a cohort of design thinking coaches that were hired by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and trained by this agency called Better by Design. And I walked into a room of 30 people and thought, there's someone I just need to get to know.
Right.
And I also heard from colleagues at Better by Design that we think we've got a transgender woman in the cohort. So it didn't take a rocket scientist to stitch those two things together. And equally, Eva kind of figured out who I was by the time I'd walked through the door also. So it was a matter of time before we actually got to the same table and started talking. And as it transpired, we ended up collaborating on a few projects, and so we had a chance to get to know each other, and those projects around New Zealand, one in particular in Invercargill, with Stabicraft, the aluminium boat maker, and actually some other engineering companies down in Invercargill, and so Eva and I used to share the road for 3 hours between Dunedin, where Eva lived. I got to know Eva's partner, Anne, and we had a lot of time to get to kind of hang with each other and find out about each other and where we came from. And I think in Eva I met someone who was refreshing, astoundingly, shockingly intelligent, someone who swore more than you do, Harv, and more than I do, discreetly sometimes. Or not. And I also met someone who had the courage to follow their, life's purpose, but after a wife and 3 sons who would now be in their 30s, she decided that she should reassign her gender, or that she would like to become a woman. And I understand from both a colleague, Linda Henderson in Dunedin, and her partner, that when Eva followed through with the gender reassignment and the full operation, the full plumbing, as Eva would describe it, she came back a complete person. And I've always, for that reason, respected her courage and her this amazing story that she told about changing her life.
I remember asking Eva, when did she think that she was in the wrong body? And she said when she was about 3.
I didn't know that.
And she
That's
said,
fascinating.
because I was just intrigued. I said, and she said, when I was 3. And she said, just fought against it all those years. Yeah. So Peter, and you worked on projects, you were mates. Just before we move on for Eva, because we will talk about you a little bit today as well.
Bless.
Or we could just...
Well, yeah, we could talk about Eva. Yeah, we're done, right? It was really interesting.
I never had the pleasure of going to her home in Dunedin.
Yeah.
And she was very proud of the design and the heating of it.
Yes.
I think that it was all natural heating.
Yeah. So I got to stay there a few times, and there was a day when she proudly announced that it was 29 degrees inside the house. She could find out on her phone, and it was -10 outside.
Right.
So that tells you something about heating efficiency, which she hadn't got entirely right at the beginning when she fitted this solar system. And she had a windmill outside to generate electricity, a mono-mill actually, it just had one blade. She blew the pipes.
Right.
The system was a little more efficient than had been allowed for. But this house was an extraordinarily rigorous, well thought through, yet beautifully simple house that sat well in its landscape in the hills north of Dunedin and overlooked. Can't remember the name. I can't remember the name, but it had beautiful views to the north, and sometimes you could see snowy caps, and to a landlocked, urban, city-bound Aucklander, going to Dunedin was pretty wild. And actually, it would be remiss of me not to point out that every now and again this magnificent transgender woman had a little bloke that came out, particularly when she drove her Fiat Coupe.
Right.
Those knuckles would go white, and my feet would start to wear out the carpet on the passenger side as we careered up this winding road to her house. She knew the road like the back of her hand. She didn't need to worry, but I was thinking, gosh, this is quick. But, yeah. And she was pretty snappy with a gearbox.
So, Peter, that's Eva. And look, we are just scratching the surface, but I was always very thankful that she introduced us.
Yeah.
You've had, and we'll get onto this
Likewise.
later on, had a huge influence on collective intelligence as a whole, and this. So, like Eva, you are a design coach.
Yes. Yep.
Which means what?
It means coaching organisations in the processes and tools and skills of how a designer might work or think, and specifically a product designer. And the three areas to make sense of or land or bring home what a design coach does are the three areas I specialise in. One is uncovering the stories that organisations have about people, specifically their customers, but it can be their own people. So a design coach in story, a design coach in purpose, organisational purpose. So many organisations believe their purpose is to make profit. That's the outcome.
Right.
It's not the reason they exist.
Yep.
But trying to figure out what that is in a way that galvanises action and means something to all their people is somewhat more challenging and not always obvious. And we've come from a background where at board level or executive level there have been significant investment in vision and mission and values, but not so much in purpose. Purpose is what drives people from the gut, not from the top. And not necessarily from where they think they're going or the job they have to do. But it does have people, human beings, at its heart. And then the third area I work in, design thinking, which is where the genesis of this methodology came from, is in a process to make sure that the products and services we make are fit for purpose and meet somebody's needs beautifully. And if you want to see how that doesn't work out when products aren't properly researched and thought through, or maybe didn't have a human being at the end of that product or service, you have only to look at the technology sector. That graveyard is packed solid of products that people thought would be great, but nobody used them.
Right.
Yeah. Or services that were conceived that people actually didn't want.
What's some of your biggest pet hates, Peter, when you look at a product and just go, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Actually, the one that comes immediately to mind is absurd complexity. Life's really short. Don't give me a remote control with 100 buttons. I have zero interest in figuring out anything other than what I need. And so, products can be and should be really complex, but they're at their most beautiful when they present a simple face, something that you kind of just pick up and figure out yourself. So I can't stand products that are complicated, needlessly complicated. I can't stand products that nobody spent the time to figure out how people are going to use them before they made them, before they designed and made them.
Yep.
I have an innate need for economy, and it's almost a Scandinavian design ethic that I can't stand wastefulness. So I like products that last a very long time, and I love fashion. It absolutely has a place, but I don't necessarily like fashion when I want the car to last 10 years, or a piece of furniture that could last 15 years. Fashion's not very helpful then. So I guess I like things that are enduring.
Yep. And because one of the things that I have been fascinated with, you've got a camera, right?
Yeah.
You're a photographer.
Yeah.
Tell me about your camera.
Yeah. It's beautiful because, and there's a very real risk that some listeners might imagine that I own lots of expensive things, and I can tell you that there is a massive tension here that when you've had a significant design training and experience, as have I, in New Zealand and elsewhere, you start to really appreciate things that are properly thought through and properly designed, and that can end up being quite a financial rabbit hole, as I discovered owning 3 Citroens, which I really wish that I'd spent money on a shrink, not 3 Citroens. It would have been cheaper, even if I'd seen them twice a week. But coming back to your question, what was the question?
Not about the Citroens.
Yeah, no.
About your camera.
Oh yeah, the Leica. So I've got a gorgeous little camera, the Leica TL2. This is a 100-year-old German camera manufacturer who are thriving when smartphones have hijacked the entire photography world. This is a camera company that's old, that's still making cameras as fast as they can make them and still has demand. My camera I love because actually it's a smartphone, not literally, but metaphorically glued onto the back of a traditional camera. And it's very small. And at the launch in 2014 of the very first model, they released an advertising commercial that went for 45 minutes, because that's how long it takes to hand polish one of these things, made from a billet of 1,200 grams of aluminium, CNC cut and polished to 183 grams, and then with some software stuck inside, and magnificent Leica lenses, which are kind of world famous, attached, and a few other things. But the beautiful thing about this camera is that they spent all their time and energy figuring out what photographers didn't need.
Right.
And they also figured out that many people spend most of their an unhealthy amount of their lives on a smartphone, and actually a camera didn't need to be technical. It could be a bit like a smartphone. You could just poke at things that you wanted, touch things you wanted to do, and it would help you through the process. So it came out of the camera grew out of a love of recording moments, photography, which I've done since my early 20s, and a need for something that was so beautifully designed that I could pick it up in 3 months, having not used it, and know exactly where everything is.
Yep.
So I still have one that's now 6-7 years.
And what's interesting with this camera, because you see a lot of things are made to look really flashy, and this thing is complete opposite, isn't it? It looks very uninteresting almost.
Yeah. Some might think it's banal. Those people that like 100 buttons on their remote control are really going to be unhappy with this. But and equally, this is a company that has just so happened to make cameras for some of the best photographers in the world, bar none. So the Henri Cartier-Bresson, the Magnum photographers, they all use these cameras because the camera got out of the way of the photograph and the story. That's what's beautiful about this company. They're brutal, they're rigorous, they're magnificently well thought through. They publish a magazine that I subscribe to because it's, especially in these COVID times when you can't leave New Zealand, you can get lost in Mongolia on a photo essay about a local nomadic tribe, or a tribe crossing the Caucasian mountains, or you can get lost. Any one of the articles that are about people and places for 80% of the magazine. And if you look really hard at the back of the magazine, there might be an article on a limited edition 007 camera that's being brought out in conjunction with the latest James Bond movie. And being Leica, the only thing that's any different is the colour, which is dark khaki grey, with a gun barrel lens cap that's probably made in plastic. But they don't move quickly, this company. They just design things that last. But the beauty of this, it's never about a product. I used to take photographs when I lived away in Europe. I used to spend a lot of time in Paris alone with a book and a camera. I needed nothing else. It was my way of experiencing the world. Taking a photograph is capturing a moment that I can kind of figure out later. It was a way of understanding what was going on in the world, what I was seeing.
How old were you when you were doing that?
I was 23. So I went to London, as did so many young 20-something-year-old Kiwis. I finished design school. Thought, yes, I could get a job. I could earn money. No, this is really boring. I hate this. I had a mate who was going to London. He said, "Oh, why don't you come too?" And I said, "That's a great idea. I'll see you there in 6 months." So I crash saved, sold everything I owned that I thought I needed and didn't. Got on a plane with a fistful of traveller's checks and a backpack, and I don't think I've ever experienced such freedom. That wasn't just going to London. That was, I'm leaving New Zealand. I'm going to the rest of the world. And I spent 2 years in London and 7 months in Luxembourg. So I used to, it's a funny little town. Well, it's a very pretty little town, but it's small. So I used to catch the fast train to the local train to Paris, which was 2 hours on a Friday night and 2 hours back on Sunday night.
And what was the job profession that you were going over to?
Yeah, so I studied graphic design, as it was called, back then at what is now AUT. It was ATI back then. And in the mid-80s, the design scene in London was such that there weren't enough graphic designers to go around. So I got 2 job offers in half an hour of going to a recruitment company, and got paid a lot more money than my friends. I had quite a few friends in London, and it meant I could indulge in a little bit of travel, lots of going to Paris, I got to hang out in London and explore the
And what is
town.
a graphic designer supposed to do?
Graphic designers are visual communicators.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with visual imagery to tell a story. And what I loved most in London at the time wasn't the work I was doing, which was okay, but I loved that this was an industry that had kind of reached this something of a pinnacle. It was the most beautifully articulated copy, the most exquisitely crafted typography to render that copy, and there were beautiful, almost, budget no object photography or illustrations or drawings, craft. So the state of the design industry in London at the time, more broadly than graphic design, but it was a wonderful time to be in London because things were changing rapidly, and it was pretty cool to be part of that design scene right in the heart in Covent Garden, which I used to cycle down the hill to every morning for work. It was hard. I would be at work until 10 o'clock at night.
Yep.
That was tough.
And you grew up in rural New Zealand?
Yep.
On a farm?
Yep.
So Farm Boy is now in the middle of London and living the dream?
Yeah, kind of. Work was really hard. There was a moment when on Sunday night I walked at sunset across Hungerford Bridge, and Big Ben was one way and St Paul's Cathedral was the other, and I thought, I am at the centre of the universe. I've arrived. But there was a lot of stress involved in the work, and it was a tight little team of 10, and there was quite a lot of yelling and screaming used to go on in that company. But I met some great people. We got to do some really good work. I should have left and got other jobs, but I thought, I'm a farm boy from the Waikato, and here I am in the middle of London. Why would I walk away from this dream job? And that job, when I now think back, had a purpose and a place.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because there is nothing like cutting your teeth in really stressful, high, and lots of work and redoing stuff.
Yeah.
What?
Can I just say, too, that's actually where I got my education.
Right.
I used to miss the tube because I'd be squinting reading the last sentence of a poster from the Victoria and Albert Museum in the most beautiful crafted typography, and I'd miss the tube.
And someone like me wouldn't have even noticed it was different to whatever. I mean, that's the thing I really have noticed and love about you, Peter, is this attention to detail.
Sure.
Is fucking painful sometimes.
Just, I reckon I've got a few clients that would share that, maybe from a little while ago, hopefully. But yep.
Peter, what are you great at?
What am I great at? I feel like I've done lots of things, but I think what I'm best at is crafting the intersection, or creating the intersection between what design can do, and I mean that, I use that word design in the broadest sense, and what companies are capable of, or what groups of people are capable of. And so it's a little bit like, again, I have to refer back to, I have to think about some of the work I've been doing recently, and it is about using design thinking, or human-centered design as it's often thought about, to figure out what people really need and want, and then helping these organisations translate that into something that someone can use, or that they can make use of. Does that make sense? So it's something of a translation job.
Well, and I've just written that down, what they can do and capable of, because the thing is that what design can do and what they're capable of, because, coming out with what design can do, but then going, well, Yeah, that's cool, but we can't do it. We don't have the budget or the capacity or the will. Getting those two together is really valuable.
Yep.
And, you know, in a very basic level, we've heard lots of stories about architects designing the most amazing houses that people can't afford to build.
Yeah.
You know, what's the fucking point of that?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Which is different, I know. But
well, it is and it isn't. So architecture is a design profession, and it thrills me when architects can beautifully meet a brief and change people's lives, shift people's life experience, a family's life experience of living every day in a building, and do it for a budget that isn't somehow a life-changing surprise at the end, because a house was never the thing. It's just a vessel. It's a vessel for the life that you're going to have in it. So I've heard of some very good architects taking on some suicidal missions with budgets that are really short, and that thrills the hell out of me. What doesn't thrill me is yet another photograph of a magnificently beautiful building with not one person in it, and even worse, not one book. That's just an object. That's, you know, that's sterile.
Yep. And, you know, you and Lindsay have got this lovely home in, I was going to say, the middle of Auckland. Whereabouts is it?
Yeah, it's in Arch Hill. It's pretty much the city fringe.
Yep. And it's a 2-story...
Yeah, it's a 2-story, 120-year-old, 125-year-old duplex.
Yep. And it's full of books.
Yep.
And possibly the flashiest stereo I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, am I allowed to call it a stereo?
Yeah, you can. No, it's a stereo. It's kind of old man anorak country, I guess. But I grew up as a teenager listening to music to relax and listening to records, and I still listen to records. And I don't know how it happened, but I've got this English stereo that seems to have 10 black boxes that nobody can quite make sense of. Lindsay's never challenged me on it. I only ever bought one box at one time, usually in 1 year. And but it like the camera, it just gets out of the way. It just lets the music through, and that's really the purpose.
Because what's interesting, Peter, you don't have a lot of stuff, right? You don't like lots of stuff.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
But the stuff you do have, like your ironing board.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You know, it's just, and it's...
I hope the listeners are not too sad. It's not that we love ironing, you understand, but I just like the ironing board to stand still. If I really have to iron something, I just like the ironing board to stay still. So it's a beautifully designed Italian ironing board called the Magus, I think.
Yeah, because we've all ironed. I do very little ironing.
Yeah.
But we've all ironed on ironing boards that just can't fucking stand up.
Yeah. Or worse, you go to a hotel.
Yeah.
And try finding the ironing board. Then try getting the ironing board to stay still.
Yeah.
That ironing board, by the way, is 20 years old.
Yep.
But we'll have it in 20 years' time.
Yep.
So if we're still ironing.
And that's the thing I've always noticed about you is that it's you don't have a lot of stuff, but what you have is fabulous quality.
Yeah.
And I've often thought the economics of that will be outrageous over time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Peter, one of the things that I was really interested in discussing, what is creativity to you? What does creativity mean?
Yeah. So I think it would probably mean a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of people, but I spent a long time in the design world trying to figure out what clients need. And often they're fundamental business challenges. And I think sometimes I've tried to or wrestled with this creativity thing, even the word creativity. But from a fairly young age, I think I was 8 or 9, and I became a little obsessive compulsive. I think it was a very bad colonial moment, quite possibly, but I used to draw and redraw the Endeavour Cook's ship, because I found the form just agreeable, just beautiful. And so from an early age, I started drawing. And
this is with a pencil?
Pencil.
On
anything that you can put pencil on.
Yep. And did you draw it the same way every time, or different form, different angle?
I was refining it to try and capture the three-dimensionality of it, and the beauty of the rigging and the sails in wind. And so it was a need to draw. I had an awkward time of secondary school because I figured out. Well, I was figuring out that I was gay. I don't think I even really knew, but everyone else seemed to know. And I thought art's not a very masculine pursuit. So I put all my effort into mathematics and physics, which I was quite good at, quite geeky at, and let art slip somewhat. At the point that the careers advisor in my 7th form year said, so you're going to do engineering or accounting, I thought, oh, this has gone too far. No, I want to go. I thought I might do graphic design or interior design, or maybe I could do product design. And she's just kind of shaking her head. Well, why would you want to do that? Look at your art mark, mate. You know, I just about missed out on school C art.
Right.
Limped home. So, you know, my contrarian self came out, and I didn't get into design school the first year, which made me more determined.
Right.
They let 26 people in from 230 applicants. So I got all bloody minded and went to night classes and worked in a horrible day job. Got myself in the second year, was summarily told that I was probably right at the bottom of the class, but I worked hard and got through pretty well. I still hadn't had an education, you understand. I'd learnt some skills. The education came when I lived in London. Yeah.
Coming back to the creativity.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
It's, for me, really, I'm so impressed that you can remember the question you asked that I wandered off of. For me, creativity is an innate need to express something that's going on inside. It's the need to make something, or the need to draw something, or the need to design something. And I can't sit down and make piano music. I tried to learn a guitar, classical guitar, but that didn't work out so well. I don't think I had the discipline. But creativity is just there are plywood shelves, for the listeners' benefit, that are 2 metres away from where we're sitting. I get joyful when I get to make something. Actually, Eva Gluis used to have difficult moments in business with her as a design coach. Also, she would disappear into her garage and get her serious heavy-duty woodworking gear running, and there'd be just a cloud of sawdust. She'd be off. So creativity in its broader sense is an innate human need to make things, or design things, or draw things, or paint things, I guess. Yeah.
Eva used to do this as well. You've got an iPad, and it's to me it's a thing of great wonder, because I think how much stuff is on there, because you doodle away, and Eva used to doodle away on her iPad, and then you send me these pictures.
Yeah.
And they're really interesting, and it's just, you know, stuff that is... and Eve would do the same. She'd be in a meeting, and I'd watch her, and she'd be doodling away, and she was totally absorbed in this doodling, but listening and engaged in this conversation. And then I'd go over and have a look afterwards and just go, what is that?
Yeah. Well, actually, you've just reminded me too. I think creativity has another half of the story. So one, creativity is, if you like, a manifestation of something that might be going on. But equally, it's a way of understanding the world outside. And I write notes because it gives me an opportunity to understand what's being said in a meeting, or what's going on, or it allows me to think. Because, you know, for me, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. So it could be a thought, but that's of no use until it's landed here.
Yep.
And I don't care if it's an iPad or a piece of paper. It's just that the search engine in an iPad is faster than trying to find something in a notebook.
Because it's interesting. We've got a number of your sketches printed out on the office that you've sent through, after a conversation, and go, okay, and we plaster them on the wall or different places and go, there it is, we've captured this, but you've captured that, you've taken words and put it into a picture.
Yeah.
And it looks quite different when it's on a piece, when it's a picture. Yeah.
Yeah. And they don't always work. I kind of sketch or scribble to understand, and sometimes they're a deeply personal thing that nobody else can really understand, and that's cool. But I kind of like, I force myself, sketching something, writing notes comes second nature. It would be unnatural for me to put the stylus down and turn the iPad off. But to sketch something is quite hard because I have to translate whatever is going on into some picture. So it's not a natural process, but I force myself to do it because I think it's kind of important.
Peter, I dabble a bit in sculpting with wood, and I have found that my best abstract work is when I'm really not very happy.
That's interesting.
And I just get, and I'll sit down and I don't know what it is, but I'll just have this intense, right? And often I can replicate other things in wood, and I'm happy to do that. But abstract stuff, it's really, I don't know why. I don't know why, but often, the best abstract stuff is when I'm pissed off.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? And sometimes I think, before we got together for this podcast, I've been kind of thinking about the things that have happened. And the last 2 years have been, challenging with the pandemic. And a lot of the work I do, running workshops with people in them, has passed. I can't do that in the same way. And things I've had, like so many people have learnt to adapt, as have clients. In fact, it's the other way around. The clients have adapted and I've conformed using video calls and other ways of working. But it's the hardest. I've realised that the toughest periods of my life have also been those periods when I've grown the most. When the friction is greatest, somehow you come out stronger or better. Or like going to design school, that year between getting thrown out, the year between not being invited to graphic design school and the year I got in was the toughest. I kind of had to face a very uncertain future. I had no idea whether it was going to work or not. Was I just being bloody minded? Was I being determined? Did I have any innate talent? Could I ever get in? And it was just, I didn't think about it a whole lot. I just went hard.
What's a piece of work, or what sort of work are you proudest of that you've worked on? Yeah,
the piece of work I'm proudest of hasn't yet worked. When COVID broke in this country last March, I'd been talking to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade about running a series of workshops in Vanuatu to address a very silly problem. And the silly problem starts with a kilogram of limes, and the height of our summer 3 years ago was 79 New Zealand dollars for a kilo, landed from the US. At the same time, in Vanuatu, you have no tourism because of the pandemic, and some of the other primary produce has been difficult. But they've been growing limes for 20 years. They're falling off the trees. The local volcanic soils are, they don't need to add anything. They don't even need to add water for these beautiful Tahitian limes to ripen on these trees. And they were selling them to the resorts, but the tourists are gone, so they can't. So the piece of work I'm proudest of is one where MPI rang up and said, do you think we could do this project by video call? And I agreed to do it before I'd figured out how I was going to do it. We didn't run workshops in Vanuatu. I couldn't go, but I trained a local Ni Vanuatu woman, this adorable woman, Liku Jimmy, at the New Zealand Post, in running an empathy conversation with farmers. And that piece of work resulted in the first collaborative, joined-up video workshop between Port Vila with 8 or 9 people, including farmers and a farmer's son who spoke English better than her dad, and a bunch of people in New Zealand from MPI, a couple of people from MPI and MFAT, and some others, an experienced lime grower and some others. So that project hasn't yet worked because we haven't seen the first shipment of Tahitian limes from Vanuatu, but there was a shipment, a couple of consignments a couple of months ago, but they didn't make it because they will not have been sufficiently compliant with MPI's restrictions. Right. MPI keep our agriculture and horticulture safe, so so there's still a piece of work to do, but I hope one day that I'm going to see some Vanuatu limes for sale.
And no, I was going to ask how far away do you think that will be, but you don't.
Well, look, it's it pains me to admit, but it was, we thought they were weeks away, and now it's going to be 18 months shortly. But I feel great responsibility for the 18 people we interviewed, from New Zealand chefs right back to a bunch of primary produce farmers who have day jobs. They do this with their families, their grandmothers, their aunties, the kids, every weekend to grow these beautiful limes. And they're like many Pacific nations, they're very poor. MFAT wanted to, it's a modern word, but really enable them beyond just throwing money at them and giving them a new tractor. They wanted to help them in a way that would have a long-term benefit. So I don't know when they're coming. I hope that we see them soon. If by the end of February we don't see them, then I guess we're going to have to wait till August.
And Peter, it's interesting because I have heard magnificent stories of people going in with aid to certain areas, but not interviewing the locals and so forth, and causing the most phenomenal cock-ups, and making people's lives worse than better.
So in Vanuatu, they have fly-in, fly-out consultants. They create nothing. They just go, they dispense their advice, they send a report, but nothing's changed. The piece of work that I did was to stitch everyone together so they could figure out together. I didn't figure it out. MFAT didn't figure it out. They could figure out together, how's this all going to work? How can we make this happen? So it was the first time they'd spoken to each other. Otherwise, everyone stays in their little silo. But most of all, the Vanuatu, we needed to not apply New Zealand thinking to Vanuatu's problem. We needed to understand what their problem was so they could help themselves. That's the gig.
Who do you like working with the most? Like, when do you feel as though you belong, or when you don't belong?
So I've learnt that it's really boring sitting in front of a computer designing things to please yourself. It never pleases me. I really hate it. Design's all about constraints and a challenge, and a terrible cliche, but something of a journey or a path, a torturous path to get to something good at the end, right? And I guess that the people I love working with the most are those who are not like me. And also, so I've worked with some magnificent clients over the years, and I often think, looking back, it was kind of their differences that made it really interesting. And it's not, the designer never turns up with any answers, really. It's our job to kind of translate or wrestle or ask the right questions to get to an outcome. So I guess I like working with people who are not like me, but yet are sufficiently open-minded that they can see something that might turn out differently from what we have right now. So they're sufficiently open to consider a different product or a different service or a different way of getting limes to New Zealand. And they're open to that, not married to the past, not wedded to what's gone before. So I've got, in support of that, I've got, I'm working for a wonderful family business who are brethren. They are magnificently clear. They're delightful people. They're also very clear about their opportunity, and they are wonderful to work with. What I find harder is to work with a client who pays lip service to being happy to shift what they do or change or embrace new processes or practices, but actually when all's said and done, they'd really rather things didn't stay the same. They would really rather things stayed the same, I guess.
Why do you think that is, Peter? Why do you think people struggle to embrace opportunity?
I think in part it's language. So if you take the word change, for instance, it's which incidentally I'm not fond of the word change, because most change happens to people and they feel like it's an uncomfortable thing, and yet the word is neutral, really. It's just change. It is what it is. But you just use the word opportunity. And if I say to you, Harv, we're going to change the way we do podcasts at Collective Intelligence, that feels, well, what's wrong with them?
Well, immediately
they work, right?
Immediately I'm going, okay, so obviously something I'm doing is not good enough.
Yep.
And you've spotted it, and yeah, okay, so you fucking know, well, tell me what that...
Touche, and that's exactly the thing. But if I said to you, and I don't have any suggestions, but if I said to you, Harv, I reckon there's an opportunity, we could just make these podcasts a little bit different. How does that feel? Or a little better? Would that be...
The opportunity, better is a judgment to me.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going, oh yeah. What? So immediately I went off again on that.
Bad choice of words.
But opportunity would mean I've got to change, and should mean I'm going to do it better.
Yeah.
Right?
But most importantly, if it feels like an invitation, if I couched it as a question, Harv, what would it... would you be interested in making these podcasts a little better? Or let's lose the word better. Harv, would you be interested in maybe trying out some things with these podcasts?
Yeah.
That doesn't feel threatening.
And for me, I'm going, ooh, right? Ooh, what?
Yeah.
Right?
So an example at the moment, I have done a lot of work in brand, and helping organisations, and I'm working with a professional services firm at the moment, and we're looking to shift their 8-year-old brand that was cobbled together quite quickly to something a little more thoughtful, a little better articulated, that's both a better, oh God, I'm using that word better, aren't I? As a significant improvement in what it means for their clients, and an even more importantly, sets them up for the future and is more relevant and stickier for young people, both young women who might take up this professional service, for instance. So, but it's really hard because I'm asking them to shuck off what they've come to know and love in 8 years before they can step into, the opportunity or a future that might look different. The funny thing is, it's just their brand. It's just an expression of who they are. But their clients, actually, for the most part, probably couldn't really care less. But if we do it well, nobody will feel a thing. It'll just become natural. Why did we ever run with that brand when we could have done that?
So, Peter, the question I gave you right at the beginning of this piece was around the sense of belonging, of who you resonate with.
Yeah.
And is that people basically who are open. Is that one of the key things for you?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah, so openness comes in a whole lot of forms, and I do think back to my horrible teenage years as a young gay man trying to grow up, having a label attached, being gay, but not really understanding that I was, because, we don't come with a manual, right? We're human beings.
Well, I mean, sexuality's fucking tricky enough as it is, Peter, as a teenager.
Yeah.
Right? When you're heterosexual, right? That's confusing.
Yeah.
Right? And we're all supposed to be heterosexual, aren't we? And then, that's... of course, that's not true. I'm just checking. So, to be thrown this curveball.
So, and it was kind of interesting because, and something I probably unknowingly or subconsciously fight against, but I grew up in a little town in the Waikato where you were a demigod if you were in the first 15 rugby team. Mm-hmm. You were persona non grata if you didn't. Mm-hmm. But my parents moved to this place, Warkworth, and I was 16 at the time, and I was really sick of these teenage years. So I told everyone in the 7th form, there were only 7 of us, that I was gay on the first day, and had a lovely time.
Right.
And I still have a close friend from that school, and I don't from the college that I went to. Despite the fact that I had an adorable, utterly loving family, I also had a magnificent role model in a gay cousin who lived in Germany, who everyone in the extended family absolutely adored. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but Grant made it a lot easier for me because my extended family, which probably numbers in the, somewhere like, I'm guessing somewhere around 150. I've got a lot of cousins and second cousins, and then there are 2 more generations. And I grew up with, oh gosh, you're so like Grant. Every relative would think, you're so like Grant. So, it wasn't rocket science by the time I was 15. I told my parents I was gay, and my mother said, yes, yes, dear, in a kind of knowing way. My father said, are you sure? And then said, let's go and have a beer. So, my parents were wonderfully accommodating, as were my 2 gorgeous sisters, as pretty much were the rest of the family. But school, that was tough. So my sense of belonging came when I left Mathematica.
Peter, I'm going to ask this question, and we can. I'm just framing it up. We can delete it.
Yeah, sure.
All right, we can delete it if it's out of line. Is it scary, that moment of realising that you're gay? Is it?
No.
No?
It's beautiful, because it's just who you are. It was scary at the time, because in the mid-1970s, it was kind of the gay dark years in so many ways. Obviously, what went before it was even harder, some would say, but there wasn't a whole lot of information about. There was a film called The Naked Civil Servant, and I freaked out that, so I'm going to be like Quentin Crisp, which absolutely turns out to be rubbish, because you can find every different type of person who happens to be gay, or lesbian, or transgender, or identify gender fluid, or any of the other types of sexual identity. So it was tough back then, because apart from my cousin, who unfortunately lived on the other side of the world, I had nothing to base my sense of belonging on. I also lost my best friend because I told him I was gay, and that was tough. And maybe it wasn't a surprise, but it was my first road test of coming out. and it didn't really come out, so it didn't work. It didn't happen. So I was, needless to say, pretty thrilled when we moved to Warkworth, and it felt like a little life reset. I could go sailing, which I used to I think I spent half my 7th form year on a small boat instead of in class, and I was open with my classmates, and that changed everything. And from then on, I've refused to make a big issue out of being gay, but also refused to hide, because it just didn't seem fair or right. Yeah, so I don't think I've heard horrendous stories from people that have come out, and I think some of the stories in the past are pretty hard. People have been ostracised from families, but I'm at the same time utterly thrilled that the youth of today, it seems, in many communities, is just not even a big deal. It's like saying, "Oh, you've got blonde hair or blue eyes. Yeah. Oh, you're gay. Oh, whatever."
Yeah, yeah. I went to primary school with a classmate, and he was gay, and we went to different secondary schools, and we caught up a bit after secondary school, and then I didn't see him for maybe 20 years later. And he told me that he lived with this woman for about 2 years when he was between sort of 22 and 24. And I said, "Why'd you do that?" And he said, "Well, I didn't know I was gay."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What? But we all knew you were gay."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Yeah, but I didn't."
Yeah.
And his old man was an absolute fucking arsehole, Peter. He was a horrible, mean old man. And I just think, this guy went through hell through that period, because he was just trying desperately to conform.
Yeah.
Whatever,
And many people, and I think it speaks to the this beautiful organic thing of sexuality. So many people, we have friends that have had families and then decided that they're gay. I don't know that they've ever changed. I don't think anything's happened. They've just decided to explore something that was part of who they are. We also have our closest, Lindsay and I have arguably some of our closest friends one has identified as being gay, the other has had lesbian experiences, but they're a very, very well-formed, happy couple, married couple. So it can go the other way.
While we're on Lindsay, and he's not here, so we can talk behind his back, right?
Yeah.
Look, Lindsay because the two of you are so different, but Lindsay, I kind of like you, Peter, but Lindsay, he's just fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
And he's so naughty.
Yes. He has a wicked sense of humour. And he's terrifically intolerant of people that don't have a sense of humour. And for listeners' benefit, Harv and him spar like old brothers. They can say things that even make me wince.
What was it like meeting Lindsay?
Oh, it was fabulous. So we were introduced by these two good friends of ours who invited themselves around for dinner and said we're bringing it, because they both happened to be magnificent cooks. Oh, and by the way, we're bringing a friend. And so Lindsay and I hit it off. And so came for dinner a week later, and that was 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Give or take, yeah. So it was wonderful. Lindsay had lived in France in Italy for a little while and in Paris for 7 years. And I was coming out of Francophilia. I think I was working through my desire to own French things, because I think I, at that point, would have owned a Citroen. Yeah, you could own a house in Auckland more cheaply than you could drive a Citroen. I think,
right.
At the time. Anyway, we both shared quite a lot in common, and I adored his sense of humour, and he was pretty much the opposite of me, actually, and it was fun. Yeah, so we had a lovely time. But yeah, like any relationship, there are always good days and bad days, and we Lindsay lived in Melbourne for a year. That was tough. He went for 2 years for work. But luckily, his mother and I worked on him and got him back after a year.
Right. Yeah, he is. He's pretty unique, but I just the only thing I don't like about him on the record is when he starts talking French, and I go, "What are you saying, you bastard?"
No, it's second nature, because he likes to keep his knowledge of, after living there for 7 years and becoming pretty fluent, and he still has long-term French friends that he converses with. One of them's an academic, and it's hell. He has to concentrate 100% to speak to her because she will correct him,
right,
if he gets anything wrong.
Right,
and he has a very exacting standard. He reads books only in French because it's a way of keeping that part of the brain active. But I think it's quite second nature. And yeah, it can be a bit irritating, but he will slip into, he'll translate it for you, whatever it is. So, but I've had a couple of friends that like to translate things for you. And because Lindsay rocked up, I gave up on learning French because he was really good at it.
Right.
And I had crashed my way through a couple of courses when I was living in Luxembourg and in London before that. To learn what could only be termed as pretty clumsy schoolboy French. I had really good pronunciation and abysmal vocabulary, so I ran out of words really quickly, but it didn't stop me trying. And you, back in the 80s, you couldn't speak English in Paris.
Right.
You couldn't exist. You couldn't visit for the weekend. It's different now. The young people all speak French, English. Sorry.
Yeah. Peter, professionally, when do you feel you don't belong?
Yeah, great question. I don't fit well in the traditional design industry anymore. So I like hanging out with other people that do design research or ethnography or design thinking or human-centered design. I spent a whole lot of time in the graphic design industry, and I struggle with awards evenings because they can be somewhat sterile and quite fashionable, and it's all about how you look and how prestigious the work that you've done is. And I think, yeah, but where's the human being in this? It could be the latest fashionable typeface or the most exquisitely crafted photography or illustration, and I think I left that behind. But also there's a small part of me that would still like to be that designer that is right on trend. So for listeners, if you haven't been in the design industry, particularly in the graphic design industry, one of my tutors once famously said, "Are you going to peak at about 25? Just get used to it. You're probably done by the time you're 45. And it really stuck with me, and I think I really disagree with that. But I think I'm also the living proof. You kind of, old designers need to evolve and learn some new tricks along the way. And so that's why I retrained in design thinking process 12, 13 years ago.
It's funny you say that 25 to 45, because I often think about sports people, that what a bug of a career, that you're at your best in your 20s, late 20s, depending on the sport, it changes, right? Yeah. And then you do your thing, and then what? Yeah. You know, you've done your thing, you've peaked, you've been famous or whatever, and then what? Yeah. So absolutely. I don't digress, but I often think at the time, so what comes after that? And it must be bloody tough. Yeah. It
is. It's also really tough for young designers at the moment. And I don't know how many times I've seen portfolios, and they show this beautiful work, and they talk about what they've done, but they don't always talk about who it's for and what problem it solves, or why it even exists, and what they set out to do. So that only comes from an innate curiosity about the world we live in, and an innate need to fix things that are busted or just don't work as well as they should. That remote control with 100 buttons.
So, because I was surprised when I asked you, because I know some of the stuff you've worked on. You've worked on some pretty big projects, right? And so when I asked you what's the thing you're most proud of, Vanuatu limes was not the answer I was expecting.
I've got another answer, which is a completely different answer.
Give me that one.
Okay. It's because it's completely the opposite of Vanuatu.
Yep, but
in a short form.
Before we do that,
though,
but it's interesting that for you, solving that problem, which hasn't come, that was the thing that spun your wheels.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Very unglamorous.
Yeah.
And so forth, right? But as a design, which is totally a mile away from awards evening, because you're not going to get any award for that better.
No, never.
No. And I doubt whether your name will be hardly ever mentioned.
No award could come close,
right,
to imagining what it would be like for those near Vanuatu Melanesian families to earn money they're not now earning because they've sold their limes to New Zealand. That is a reward, the likes of which cannot be repeated in any other way, shape or form.
Nice.
So the other little piece of work that I'm quietly proud of was on the Better by Design project. We had to go and pitch to export companies, and there was a company in Penrose that made lunchboxes, plastic lunchboxes, and we went and talked to this company, who many listeners will know of as Sistema, the lunchboxes with the little blue clips that make a very pleasing sound when you shut them. And I had colleagues there and a couple of people from New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and the government was really keen to support this company because they could see the amount of potential in this, essentially a plastic moulding company. And in this meeting, I asked Brendan Lindsay, who was the majority owner, why was it that all his ranges of plastic containers were so systematic and so well thought through, but the brand was all over the place? And I wasn't meaning to be obnoxious, I was just asking a question. And he kind of, I think Brendan grunted at the time, sort of, just sat there thinking. And because I'm not always appropriate with what I say, I thought, he hasn't said anything, so I'll just go on with a second question, which is, why does your brand look Italian? It's called Sistema. I thought it was an Italian brand, not a Kiwi brand. And I don't remember how he responded, and I'm not certain it was a very good response. But half an hour later on the way out, he said, I'll see you on the 1st of April. And so we did a piece of the design company that I was a third partner in PhD3. We did a piece of strategy work for a year to reset Sistema so that people in their 28 markets could get to know who they were, because they were doing a very good job of hiding their name, Sistema. So we tidied up the brand. They had 16 sub-brands. Nobody knew who they were. If you changed your name every day, do you remember? Can you imagine how quickly people would forget who you are, right? So this was what was going on. So they tidied up their brand. It cost them, I think, just over $1 million New Zealand dollars to relabel those containers. But the fast forward, and this is a very commercial story, it's the opposite of Vanuatu. It's that company, many listeners will know, sold for a cool $652 million, biggest private sale in New Zealand at the time. They took me to Chicago to a fair, first class tickets all the way through, and we spent 4 days in Chicago, and it was the most wonderful eye-opening exercise. We were invited to a Christmas party. My colleagues and I, or a business partner and I, went to their Christmas party, which was magnificent, in a factory that was empty, that they had just purchased, that they were going to occupy with robots. It's not the one they currently occupy, which is just off the planet, nearly off the planet. Sorry, it's just near the Auckland airport. But this factory had, I think, 300 people that worked for them and their families, and there were barbecues, batteries of barbecues, and they cooked lunch for all of the staff. But in that meeting, Brendan thanked Jim Griffin, my business partner, and I, because we had contributed in no small way to $30 million of extra sales that year. So that was a hard-ass commercial story.
And Peter, thank you for that, because it's good to hear the range of stuff, right? It's and because the thing is, that question, I've met that guy that
Brendan Lindsay,
and heard him speak. He's pretty gruff.
He was tough.
Yeah,
he was brutally honest.
Yeah,
actually, kind of refreshing.
Yeah, he
was plain.
And I remember him. He gave a presentation, and it's nearly a naughty word. It's not, but he put up on the thing, "Don't be a can't."
Yeah.
Was this thing, don't be a can't, right? Don't say you can't do stuff. But
yeah.
And I remember listening to him speak. He was a very, very down to earth guy, and obviously very driven and so forth. And that was, developed a fabulous business. But I'm also reflecting on the power of questions that get under your skin, and you can't get rid of them.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
And that's all I did, was ask some questions that were really important to me, but maybe they hadn't thought about them.
Yeah.
And his head designer was in the room, who's a delightful man, and we worked with him. He was absolutely cool about it.
Yeah.
It was very challenging for them to shift what they were doing that made sense to them to something that was very important to me, that made sense to their customers. And that's often the story with New Zealand exporters. We grow, we get export orders from Australia, we send stuff into the States, and we forget that people at the end of the line are the people that pay our wages. And so we forget them at our own risk, really, so our own peril. So it's a bit that kind of excites me, that intersection.
Yep. How has Peter Roband changed as a person from the young man in London to now? How have you grown?
Yeah. I think the way that there was a book published by a couple of partners of IDEO, big design thinking organisation in the US, the Kelly brothers, called Creative Confidence. And I think what's the thing that has changed the most in my life is that shy kid that liked to draw to someone who gets bored quickly if I can't get to the truth, that what's going on in an organisation, or I can't figure out why an organisation is not doing things differently or better. And I guess what's changed is that I don't care about walking into a room full of men in suits or a board. I don't really care if it's who it is. I certainly care less about their position, their job title, their business card, or the amount of money they earn, or their importance in the world. I just care that I might be able to play a part or do something that might make things different or better. So so I guess it's going from it's been a big migration from the need to be creative and make things, which I can assure you and listeners hasn't gone away, to someone who really likes to fix stuff and doesn't care what they have to do to get there. So I like to think I'm getting more courageous, but I think I might have a little way to go. There you go. Yep.
And two things there. I've just thought, you could work with a squillion different clients and companies because of that philosophy, right? So this could be applied to a huge range of different organisations. And I was also looking at your face when you were talking about that courageous piece.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's going on there?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think on a continuum, I'm deeply curious. Like, the world's just got more and more interesting. With every passing year, things have become more and more fascinating. The courageous thing is a work in progress because I think I've yet to do my best work. I think I've yet to take on the kinds of projects that I could do or am capable of. There's also, for me, I have a discomfort in that I've been on 3 study tours to the US, and I've smelt and tasted what it's like to be in the presence of a fast-growing, innovative company making products that people didn't even know about yesterday, didn't even think were possible yesterday. And so when the 2 study tours to New York, I didn't want to get on a plane and come home. I just wanted to go get a job. So the courage piece is still a work in progress. I think I have yet to become that courageous person that I'd quite like to be. And one of my little dreams is to go live with Lindsay in Berlin for 6 months and do nothing but take street photographs of people. Because that would be, that fills me with fear and thrills me at the same time. It would just be recording people in life. And Berlin's a pretty cool city. It's full of delightful, like New York, full of kooky people doing their own shit, not conforming, not doing what people expect of them. It's a wonderful place. And street photography is really invasive. I don't know if you've been with a photographer that stands 1 metre away from your face and takes records a part of your life that you maybe don't have control of. You don't even know why they're doing it. But it fascinates the hell out of me because it's also a window into people's soul. It's recording a moment of them being who they are. That would definitely be on the courage checklist one day.
And now we've got it recorded.
Yeah.
Now we've got it recorded.
And a contract coming with a signature on it. Yeah.
And Lindsay's now roped into this thing as
well.
well.
He's just as keen. COVID has rather pushed back this possibility, I guess.
Right. What does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, good timing. Freedom for me was leaving the design office in Auckland and finding myself somewhere in New Zealand or in Australia running a workshop with people I'd never met in a place I'd never been to. That was freedom. Scary as hell, but really exciting. Freedom was working on things I couldn't even begin to figure out, knowing that I had enough processes and tools in my backpack to get through to something that was going to be of some use to that organisation. But most of all, freedom has been the ability to change environment and go someplace else. So as a young man, I used to do an insane 30,000 kilometres a year in another French car, but all over the country. The idea of sitting still at the weekend just wasn't in my vocabulary, and I'd fill the car up with 4 friends and we'd go to the Coromandel, or we'd go to Wellington, drive down on Friday night, come back on Sunday afternoon. Why would anyone do that? It was 7 hours drive or 8 hours drive. And then when I met Lindsay, I met a kindred spirit who loved to travel. He'd travelled alone in the Australian outback, hitchhiking at 17. Reasonably
Lindsay.
Courageous, yes, Lindsay. It was a bit of a Thelma and Louise moment, I think. He found 2 women that picked him up in a convertible, and there starts the story. But
just for the record, he doesn't look like Brad Pitt.
No. Was it Brad Pitt or was it Keanu Reeves?
No, it was Brad Pitt.
Was it?
Thelma and Louise, Brad Pitt.
Ah, yes, I've forgotten. You're right. So, fortunately in Lindsay I met someone who was even more restless about travelling than I was. So, my citrons kept me from overseas travel, it has to be said. So when I met Lindsay, eventually I bought a sensible car, which meant that we could travel once a year, and it became twice a year from 2010 through to just a couple of years ago. So there's a map in the back room, and it's got pins in that old-fashioned way about the places we've been, but it also might have some green pins about the places we might one day go. So we've been we made a point of going overseas twice a year, and often I'd go up to the States generally for work once a year or so. So that was pretty... and there's nothing like getting off a plane. And it isn't about the places you visit, it's about how they make you feel. It's that sense of being in a Land Rover in Namibia with a, goodness knows what, a 3 or 4 or 5 ton elephant rubbing against the side of it as it walks past, and think, I hope it can't see me, because this is quite scary. Or flying into JFK and looking at all the twinkling lights and think, oh, I think my life might just be starting all over again. It doesn't matter where it is. It matters a lot where it is, but it matters that it's a place where we can explore that has something fresh, something new. Yeah.
And the word purpose.
Yeah.
Peter, what does that mean to you?
Purpose. The word purpose is finding, for me it's a professional thing in helping people, helping groups of people, or helping organisations figure out what their true north is, what really matters to them. Because just like that remote control, we can have 100 different buttons, but most of them are pointless. So figuring out what matters, figuring out what's going to really fly people's kites in the future, and doing something that is as emotional and spiritual as it is functional, and doing something in a way that brings people that just shouldn't even work together to do something. That's purpose to me. It's something that you should feel in your gut, not in your head, not think about in your head, or necessarily think about as a heart thing, but something that is just inherent about what you're doing. And yeah, for me that diversity thing just is such a big deal as well. I think I'm addicted to that. Yeah. And that, when I see these homophilies and a whole lot of people agreeing with each other and it's just ghastly. I think that was full apologies to a significant and beautiful design community in New Zealand, but the New Zealand Best Awards. That was like, there are 1,000 people in this room that all agree with each other and think they're all fabulous. And I think, I've had clients, I've seen their faces, they just can't stay awake. It's a very important design event that happens every year before COVID, and I don't want to diss it, but the real purpose for any designer is in the changes they've made for people, not in winning a design award. It has its place, but just not maybe in so much for me.
Peter, my oldest son, Guy, he was in a dairy industry awards a few years ago, and went along. It was in Palmerston North, and everybody was there, and the sponsors would get up for these awards and they'd shake hands and whatever. And I went up to one of the sponsors and I said, "Why don't you say anything?" Because the sponsors didn't say anything; they just stood up there and I said, "Why don't you say anything?" And so, because they're concerned that we might say the wrong thing. Yes. Right. So that was like red rag to a bull to me. Right? Yeah. And then I started looking around and went, this whole thing's orchestrated. This whole thing is orchestrated. And I went up to one of the organisers, who was a professor at Massey, and said to her, and she goes, "Harv, isn't this a wonderful night?" I said, this is the Nazi Party of 1938. This is what this is.
Oh, my goodness.
And she went, oh, don't be so... I said, you're all pissing in each other's pockets and everybody's too scared to say anything different. I said, this is glorifying young people getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to milk somebody else's cows. And she went, oh, I think you're being very cynical. I said, oh, maybe I am. But that's what it looks like. But it just stood out because I was just going, what's wrong here? What's not, you know? And it was just everybody agreeing, you know. And I am now, when I see everybody agreeing, then I don't trust that. And, you know, one of the things I love working with you, Peter, is that you kick my ass so often, you know, I never have to worry about, what does Peter think about this? Because there's a very short gap between, you know, right?
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah. I hadn't realised that, but yes.
And the thing is, I trust that because you will push back, you know? And at the time, I often think, oh, just shut the fuck up, Peter. But, you know, it makes me stop and reflect and go, oh, I was starting to believe my own bullshit, you know? You did it to me last year in February down in Napier, right, when I was facilitating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was great, you know? And I didn't want to hear that feedback at the time, but you were absolutely on the button.
Yeah.
And I trust that when people go, you know, and I encourage the staff in the office to argue. You know, when Patina first turned up, she was a good girl. She came from the museum background. I said, don't bring that shit on here. No. You need to argue.
Yeah, you do.
And I think it's really important to be able to do that.
Yeah. Absolutely critical. Yeah.
And then there's Lindsay, and he shouldn't do that at all. Peter, what should we round this conversation?
Well, I'd like to talk, without breaching confidence, about my collective intelligence and why I joined.
Okay.
So we can circle back to Eva here.
Yes.
Because Eva, I have to say, Eva Glewis, this transgender woman, did a magnificent job of selling collective intelligence. And she did it like this. She'd just drop into conversation. She was going to collective intelligence next week. And I think by the third or fourth time, it was like, will you please tell me what collective intelligence is? Because she just never said much about it. And then she described it. And I thought, well, she said, you really have to meet Harv. So we met. And there was 10 magnificent minutes when you shared with me over coffee in just off Karangapi Road in St Kevin's Arcade what you were setting out to do. And I had this sinking feeling that you meant it. And I thought, this organisation I need to be a part of, because someone has had the courage of their conviction to follow something they believe in that could do significant work in New Zealand. And so I joined that in January, I think, and had my first meeting, which was a host day with my colleague, collective intelligence team colleague, Matt Miller.
Down in Napier.
Down in Napier.
Yep.
And it was awkward and awful, and I thought, this is horrible, and this is exactly why I needed to join. Because in the design world, I think I'd got a little comfortable. And I'd learned that following discomfort usually comes something quite good. And I joined Collective Intelligence, and I think you probably remember at the time, it was an experiment. I thought I needed a place to play. Yep. I needed a place to try things out that was both safe but challenging. And on the team, I have a magnificent team 10 dot. I think it was number 27 of the cohorts of the teams. And there's not one team member, one of my gorgeous colleagues, that won't call you out if you start talking bullshit. And that, so it was a big experiment, and that team incidentally challenged me about my partnership at the time and my place in it, which helped in no small way in my decision to resign and go free range, which I did now nearly 3.5 years ago. But they've also called bullshit. They've challenged me. I've learnt to love these people because they're just not like me, and it's just the most refreshing, eye-opening and wonderful experiment in getting to understand human nature better. And the magic in collective intelligence is that it is not personal development. It's not professional development. It's whatever the team decides to work on. And as human beings, we spend way too much time compartmentalising things and not nearly enough time shoving it all in the pot and trying to figure it out. Yeah. So collective intelligence, my team is still a wonderful experiment that I would not be talked out of easily.
And I think that's really the right way to describe it, Peter, because I pointed out to somebody before Christmas and they were grumpy with their team about something. I said, the good thing with this process, it works when it's not working.
Yeah.
So at the moment you're pissed off with this.
Yep.
And that's cool. So what are you learning?
Yeah. Yep.
And they're like, what? I said, we don't try and do perfect. We don't try and do it the right way or it's a melting pot. It's dynamic. It's moving all the time. It's never, if it sits still, then it's just going to rot.
Yep.
And right now you're pissed off. So what are you learning?
Yep.
Because it's working right now.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting. I hadn't thought of that. And they were about to leave the team because they were pissed off. I hadn't thought about that. And this woman, she'd been a great member for a long time, and she recalibrated and jumped back in guns blazing. Yeah.
And I think sometimes, like any relationship, you have a relationship with your team. There are good days and bad days. The critical thing to me is anything good takes time. And we kind of have, in the design thinking world, or human-centered design world, there is an expectation that anything good, anything beautiful, you're going to go through a really untidy period of ambiguity. And I would add to that a time of challenge, a time of friction, a time of awkwardness, even a time of conflict. But you're going to have to get through that to get to something good. If it was easy, someone else has done it.
Yeah.
If it was easy, it would wash off.
Yep. Peter, I was very close to walking out in my collective intelligence team. I presented a business plan to them maybe 4.5 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. And yeah, that's about right. And presented it to them, and I'd worked on it with the board and the chair and so forth, and they just looked at it and went, yeah, it's good for everybody else, but it's not good for you. And they said, shut.
Yeah.
And they saw it, and I went, what? And they said, you're doing this to please everybody else, but this isn't good for you. And they just rejected it within 10 minutes. So I said, no, you need to read through the detail. And we went, no, the summary's shit, and so the detail's going to be shit. No, this is crap. And I remember ringing Kate that night, and I said, and she said, obviously don't understand. And I said, I don't understand. Yeah. And I remember it was 3:30 in the morning, and I'm just cooking, right? I'm cooking. And luckily our facilitator, Sue Johnson, wonderful facilitator, had given me some tools of Breno Brown's to work through. And I worked through that, and I text them off to Sue at 7 o'clock in the morning. I put all this shitty first draft down. And Anyway, went to breakfast the next morning and came clean. I thought they were a pack of arseholes and whatever, and they just sort of laughed at me. And we got on with the day. And they said, look, it's a shit plan, find another plan. And fascinating, that was on the Friday, and by next Wednesday I'd met Mary Beth and she came on board.
Right. Yep. Magnificent woman.
And Peter, they just saw straight through my bullshit, which was I was trying to please other people.
Yeah.
Right? Which I have got a terrible tendency to do sometimes. And they went, yeah, it's good for everybody else, but it's not good for you.
Yeah. Interesting.
But it's that piece when we're challenged, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you challenged me down in Napier, you know, at the time I'm just going, initial things just, oh, fuck off. Right, they're going, what's he get? Oh, yeah. Suck that up. Okay. Put the ego aside. Okay. And then what? Yeah. You know? And it was just, but it's not easy, is it?
It's not. Well, unfortunately, I feel like sometimes many of us are predisposed to take something like that personally. But when you think of somehow of the context or the greater purpose for what you're trying to do, who cares? It's just, how are we going to get to this? How are we going to solve this? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to make it work? And then it stops being a thing. It took me years in business to figure out that actually in a design business we're not there to solve the life problems of our employees. They're there to do a job. And that people don't necessarily behave well if you don't challenge them. But, you know, we're a bunch of designers. We just hadn't had nearly enough training in people management necessarily. And we did them a disservice, those people, I think, because we could have, you know, gone harder, worked, you know, been more open, more honest, more challenging with each other. And by the way, they were stellar staff.
Peter, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Pleasure.
And is there anything else you want to finish on?
No, not that I realise, not that I can think of. Just I'd like to thank one Eva Lewis, may she rest in peace, for having introduced us in the first place.
Yeah. And for those people who don't know, Eva hosted my team. I was on the team with Eva and hosted us at your old business.
That's right.
And she had a problem with her hand. It was a muscular thing, wasn't it?
It was the early onset of this brain tumour that took her life. She was paralysed in one hand while she was having her while she was having her host day.
And so at that host day, she had this problem with her hand, and we were, you know, intrigued with this. We had no idea what was coming. And then soon after that, it was diagnosed as a brain tumour, and then diagnosed that there was nothing they could do with the brain tumour.
Happened really, really quickly.
In some ways, thankfully, very quickly. But we were in shock and then went down to Dunedin once Eva died, which was only 4 months later. And launched a scholarship under her name, and it was a pretty tough gig. And I had the wonderful pleasure of going down for a weekend to nurse her to give Anne a break.
Yeah.
And this was
right. I was there the day before. I think I flew down on the Saturday and you came down on the Sunday.
I came down on the Sunday.
Yep.
And the only word she could say at that stage was fuck, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was, she used to distribute that word freely and easily, which used to delight. Especially when it rocked up in the most inappropriate places.
And I remember saying to her that I was in charge of feeding her, and I said, Eva, this is going to be interesting. I said, you can't talk very well. I'm deaf. I'm supposed to feed you. I'm shit with food. This Sunday, this day could go terribly wrong. Yeah. And she just went, fuck! And it was funny. And then the other thing she did, Peter, was she asked me to tell her a story. And I started telling a story, and she started going, boring. I thought you daft. Oh, it was so much fun that day.
That's her partner, Anne, partner in life, and reminded me not so long ago that Eva famously was trying to redesign not only the hospital, but the health system from her deathbed. She just found what was going on atrocious. So she just never stopped.
She never stopped. Peter Roband, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for hosting me in this stunning place at Tea Point. And good luck with
the courage.
The courage piece. And the trip to Berlin.
Yeah, thank you.
You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff, and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular collective intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.